Good day, everyone. We're about to go over our um, our first standard, um, and I just want to go over a couple of things before you start. Before we get started, first thing is the standard. The standard is SSUSH1. All right, that's our first standard. Now, what that means is social studies, United States history, and that's standard one. That's why the number one is there. Now, it is to compare and contrast the development of English settlement and colonization during the 17th century. Now, another thing I want to implore to you all is to make sure that you're taking good notes. What does taking good notes mean? Taking good notes means as I go through the slides, look at that slide, and as you read it, which you should be reading it as well as as well as listening to me read it, is to understand the significance of that slide. If it's something in bold, why is it significant? If I name a particular category of colonies, why are they important? What group were they? So make sure that you examine that, and I will post some key terms and make sure that you are understanding those key terms that comes with some of these uh, that I mentioned in this PowerPoint. All right, let's move along. And our essential question is, how did mercantilism and salutary neglect lead to the development of the colony? England's colonization of the America, excuse me. Mercantilism. The colonies were created to generate and build wealth and power in England, which was the mother country, of course, through mercantilism. Mercantilism was an economic policy in which England, the mother country, established the colonies to provide raw materials to the mother country. The colonies received manufactured goods in return. So basically, England used America for its resources. Um, the Navigation Acts ensured that England would be the only country to benefit from mercantilism. These laws were designed to keep England's own colonies from competing with the mother country. And the second big thing from this is the transatlantic trade. Now, England's transatlantic trade flourished under mercantilism. Transatlantic trade, sometimes referred to as a triangular trade, often took a three-step voyage around the Atlantic Rim. Um, English ships loaded with rum, cloth, cloth, and other manufactured goods sailed to Africa, where they would trade for Africans as a part of the slave trade. Middle Passage was the leg of the journey that took place as slaves were transported on a brutal voyage from Africa to the Americas and sold there as a forced labor to colonial landowners. Raw materials transported from American colonies to England to be made into manufactured goods that would start the cycle all over again. So it's just kind of give you a good idea of what the transatlantic trade was. Moving right along. Transatlantic trade, as you can see, this is the triangular shape that it kind of mentioned as is sometimes known as you said before, uh, the triangular trade. It it was just a constant process, as you can see. Europe sent those manufactured goods onto Africa, and from Africans, they moved those Africans to those Caribbean islands, and from the Caribbean islands, they shipped those raw materials back to Europe, and this was an ongoing process. Transatlantic trade. Slaves eventually replaced indentured servants. Indentured servants were a cheap source of labor They worked on contract between 4 and 7 years. Eventually, they would become free and eligible to own their own land. Slaves would provide a free source of labor for their entire lifetime. So this indentured servant idea uh, is just basically that they were given a plot of land, and they used that land, and they were considered more like interns than they were actually slaves. But as you can see, when the slaves were born or um, brought to the plantation or whatever specific area they were brought to, they were basically a possession, a thing to be used, so to speak. So there was no chance for them to gain their freedom. Slave ships. This is a description of a slave ship, and as you can see, this is how they carried or how they placed people onto these ships. As you can see on that third and final picture of at the bottom of the ship, you can see that they had them in some cases horizontally laid down on the ground. I mean, laid down in the depths of the ship, and that's how they transported people. Um, Another example of how they transported people, and then you also have to imagine that this led to certain sicknesses as well with those people who were, kind of stacked on top of each other, so to speak, almost. And this is the coffin position below the deck. The slaves were terribly positioned in the slave ship to fit in as many slaves as possible. So this is terrible, of course, and horrendous as well. African captives thrown overboard. Um, Sharks followed the slave ships. When they had too many, or even some cases when some died on board, they would throw them overboard. Or if they knew they were not supposed to, at times when it was illegal, they were still trying to do it. And when they felt like they were about to get caught, they would, I don't know if y'all seen the scene in Shaka Zulu, but they would cuff them to each other, so to speak, with chains and throw a group of them off. So it was a really horrendous journey. From an engraving entitled "An Englishman Tastes the Sweat of an African," numbered from right to left, the image shows Africans displayed for sale in a public market. An African being examined before purchase, an Englishman licking the sweat from the African's chest to test whether he is sick with a tropical disease. A sick slave would quickly infect the rest of the human cargo on a tightly packed slave ship, and an African slave wearing an iron slave market. Southern colonies, colonial regions. Southern colonies included Virginia, Maryland, Georgia, North Carolina, and South Carolina, and were founded mainly for economic reasons. Because of it, warmer climates with long, hot summers, fertile soil, and waterways, the South was mainly agricultural with many cash crops, including tobacco, rice, cotton, and indigo. Many large plantations were located throughout the South, which required many slaves for the harsh labor. The economy of the South flourished as a result of the free, hard labor of slaves. Jamestown. Jamestown, Virginia, was the first English settlement in North America. The settlement almost failed as a result of lack of work ethic of the colonists and the mosquito-infested swamps. But due to the help of Pocahontas and her tribe teaching the colonists how to survive, and the introduction of tobacco as a cash crop, the colony survived and flourished. Um, Virginia was the site of Bacon's Rebellion. Uh, Former indentured servants were angry over the perceived failure of the Virginia governor to protect their lands from Native American attacks. Led by Nathaniel Bacon, the angry colonists burned down Jamestown. The Virginia House of Burgess was the first representative legislative body in the colonies. For the first time, citizens vowed and elected their representatives to govern their colony. The House of Burgess is one of the first examples of colonial self-government. New England colonies, um, including New Hampshire, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. Because of its colder climate with long, harsh winters, rocky soil, plenty of forests, and waterways, the northern colonies were mainly industrial, with shipbuilding and fishing as the foundation of its economy. Founded mainly for religious reasons, as pilgrims and Puritans settled the area to flee or escape religious persecution. New England's government. Pilgrims signed the Mayflower Compact, the first written government in the American colonies. It was an example of colonial self-government. The Puritans tightly controlled the political and social structures of the community. The communities were run using town meetings. Voting rights were limited to men who belonged to the church. Uh, New England, Salem witch trials. In Puritan society, extreme religious faith, stress from a growing population, deteriorating relations with American Indians, religious intolerance, and the narrow opportunities for women and girls to participate in society were direct cause of witch trials. In 1692, hysteria of the Salem witch trials led to over 150 Massachusetts colonies being accused of witchcraft. Of the 150 accused, 29 were convicted and 19 were hanged. At least 6 more people died in prison. New England, King Philip's War. Colonists in New England had a very hostile relationship with Native Americans. King Philip's War, 1675 to 1676, was an early and bloody conflict between English and regional American Indian tribe groups over colonists taking Native American lands and trying to force natives into Puritan religion. King Philip, or Metacom, was the regional leader of the American Indians. Mid-Atlantic colonies. Mid-Atlantic colonies included New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware. Because of its milder climate, with access to abundant rivers and harbors, the middle colonies were known for its abundant grain production, called the breadbasket colonies, and served as the major commercial center of trade for the colonies. The Mid-Atlantic colonial region is noted for its significant cultural and religious diversity and tolerance. It was made up of colonists of various ethnicities and religious backgrounds. I guess that's kind of where Philadelphia get its name, the city of brotherly love, which is city inside of Pennsylvania. Mid-American, New Amsterdam to New York. The Dutch established the North American colony of New Netherlands in 1614. The trade was centered around New Netherlands port of New Amsterdam. Due to the economic success of the port, England took control and renamed the colony and its major port, New York and New York City. Mid-Atlantic diversity. William Penn founded Pennsylvania as a Quaker colony. The Quakers believed in religious tolerance and fair treatment of the American Indians in the area. Because of the religious and cultural tolerance practiced by Penn and the Quakers, Pennsylvania exemplified its diversity. Exemplifies the diversity of which the Mid-Atlantic colonies are known. Colonial life. Pull factors that influence colonies to migrate to Americas from Europe included economic opportunity, religious freedom, abundance of land, and self-government. Push factors that influence the colonies to leave Europe to come to the Americas included heavy taxes, unemployment, overpopulation, overpopulation, and religious persecution. People brought from West Africa as slaves represented many different cultures. To control the slaves, slave owners attempted to strip all the cultural identity of their slaves and sought to replace it with the culture of the plantation or region to which the slave was brought. However, the physical isolation of slaves from their masters led to the creation of a new blended culture rather than the replacement from one culture to another. So you have to understand that when most slaves were brought here, they were, like you said, from different cultures, different background. Although they all were from Africa, they were from different tribes. And those different tribes, excuse me, spoke different languages. So it was conducive for the masters or for the people who bought the slave or their oppressors to bring them together and not have them understand each other as far as having the same language. Because if they had the same language as each other, they would, maybe organize against them. But this kind of also helped in the fact that they were away from their homeland. So they were in this land that they knew nothing about, that they'd never been before. So it's an interesting institution, slavery is, that we could really expound upon even more, but unfortunately we don't have as much time. Colonial life. Women in the colonies and in England were primarily viewed as inferior to men and possessed few rights. Education was emphasized differently in colonial regions. New England and middle colonies tend to support the establishment of schools within their township. The southern colonies educated their children at home, and some wealthy Southerners sent their children off for school. The Great Awakening. All right. The first Great Awakening was a religious movement and a series of revivals that spread from Europe to the colonies throughout the 1730s. The revival placed an emphasis on individual religious experience, which is a personal relationship with God, rather than religious experience through church doctrine. Individuals grew to rely more on personal approach to salvation rather than church dogma and doctrine through a personal understanding of scriptures. So basically, it made the relationship between man and God an individual relationship, and kind of took the emphasis off of individual entity, or a church, or a hardcore set of rules. Uh, all right, moving right along. Um, Great Awakening challenged and established authorities as the colonists questioned the need to follow not only the Church of England, but also the orders of the English monarchy and its authorities. Although the Enlightenment was really a movement of the intellectual elite, the Great Awakening had stronger appeal across all cross sections of society in each of the 13 colonies. Ministers such as Jonathan Edwards, William Tennant, and George Whitefield began to urge Christians to adopt more emotional involvement in Christianity through fervent prayer and personal study of the Bible. So basically, people depended on the, we'll say, preacher or the pastor to relay information of the Bible to them. But with the creating of the printing press, more people were able to access the Bible and access it on a much more grander level. Government in New World salutary neglect. Salutary neglect. The English crown had limited involvement in local government matters in the colonies as long as the mercantilism demanded for resources was being met. This system of salutary neglect continued until after the French and Indian War in 1763, at which time England faced mounting debt and began to seek greater local control over the colonies. England's policy of salutary neglect encouraged colonial self-government. The House of Burgess, Mayflower Compact, Fundamental Orders of Connecticut, and town hall meetings were all examples of self-government as a result of salutary neglect. Now, I want you all to make sure that y'all understand this idea of salutary neglect, the fact that England just left the colonies to govern themselves, so to speak, or create their own policies for that particular colony. Because it comes back and it'll end up haunting England, as we'll see as we move along in our U.S. history class. All right, that's all for the slide. Make sure you go back and take good notes. Take good notes, as I was stating before. All right. Almost forgot. If you have any questions or have any comments or anything that you want to say regarding the PowerPoint, make sure you email me. As you can see, my email is there, Terrell Johnson at cobbsk12.org. You have my work phone, my class phone, or you can contact me on the Remind app. If you're not signed up for the Remind app, sign up for the Remind app. All right. Also, all calls or emails received after 3:30 weekdays, I will get back with you the following day as soon as I can. Tutorial. Make sure if you need tutorial or you need some extra help. Wednesday, I have a tutorial from 8 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. But you have to set an appointment. And we'll work you in for a time in between those time periods. All right. If you need anything, let me know. All right.